Hi, I'm Ashy, and today we're continuing our series on color theory. So this is specific to watercolor, but I'm going to pull in lots of information about color in general and how master painters used colors to create color harmony. Color harmony is what really makes the painting sing. And it's not just about using the right colors or picking the right ones, it's about using them to build each other up and make them the most that they can be with the colors that you selected. So in this video, we're really going to look at how we can use color harmony to create unity and contrast and emotion in your artwork. So what exactly is color harmony? It is balancing the colors to really create a sense of unity in your work. So you can really emphasize certain things to pull out certain emotions or moods, or to create different focal points in your work. And color harmony is what really makes your painting feel cohesive instead of chaotic and random. So in watercolor especially, where the colors really flow together and we can use them in layers because they're transparent, and we really have to plan out our layers because they're transparent, color harmony is almost even more important to watercolor painting than to other mediums. So let's go ahead and look at some different color schemes that create instant color harmony. So first, let's look at monochromatic paintings. This is a very common type of painting that you'll see, especially when artists are trying to develop skills or practice things, because it can be used for value studies, which is very important and very helpful to be able to create contrast in work without relying on color. So you'll see a lot of this, but even not just for studies or for practice, you can see this in finished paintings as well. So I think probably the most famous painter that really mastered monochromatic paintings is Pablo Picasso. He went through a whole blue era, right? A blue phase. And so his painting, that I'm not even going to try to pronounce the name of because it's not in English and I do not speak any other languages. But this painting here of the woman, it really portrays the essence of how to use monochromatic color harmony in a very powerful way. So you can really feel the emotion behind this work here. And it's very moody and almost depressed. And you can really feel her emotion and her kind of despair in this painting. So that is a way that you can use monochromatic color scheme and really play up the emotion. So think, the blue, this really deep moodiness, kind of despair, but you could use it in the opposite way too, where maybe you do a painting in a brighter color, a yellow or a golden orange, and that's gonna give a completely different mood to the painting. And then it's about using it effectively and building up the contrast. So again, in this painting, you'll see that there are very, very light areas, especially, highlighting her skin, her hands. You can see where the light is reflecting off her clothes. And then you have the very, very deep darks in the folds of the clothes, the background, her hair, and it really plays off that contrast, and it's very effective. So you would want to do the same thing no matter which color you choose. So I have a series of paintings that is all done in what I called deep slate green. And I mixed this color, but it's all done in the same color for a whole series of 10 paintings. And my mood that I was going for was kind of like a misty, mysterious landscape mood. And so you don't know exactly what's in these landscapes, but you know that it's kind of like a peaceful, but also mysterious and solitude in this painting. So it depends on how you use this color scheme, how it works. So I'm going to do a little demonstration here, and we're going to look at kind of a value range for a color, and so that you can learn how to make the different values, which is how much darkness it is. So how much white is showing through versus how opaque and solid the paint is without any white showing through. So I'm gonna do that here, but I gotta fix my lighting real quick. Okay, one of my blinds was partially open and it was casting a lot of shadows. So I'm gonna just take a paintbrush. This is a small one, this is size 2, and I'm gonna get a page. So these were all ones that we've looked at in the previous videos of this series, so all about different colors. So I'm going to get a new page here, and we're going to do a little value chart, okay? So just for space sake, I'm going to move that over here, and then I'm going to choose a color. So we'll maybe do a couple. So I'm going to start with Windsor Violet, okay, because it's a nice dark at mass tone, which means all of the paint and none of the water, very little water, just enough to activate it. It's a very deep dark tone, okay? So I just woke some of that up and moved it into the palette, okay? So this is going to be our darkest value. This is very little water, just enough to activate it. And I'm gonna put that on the page, okay? You can see it's very scratchy because there's very little water. So to get full coverage, I have to go over it a lot and really get into the texture on the page, okay? Now I'm just gonna take the tiniest bit of water. I'm literally just dabbing my brush, the very tip of it in the water, okay? And then we're gonna get a slightly lighter value, okay? Now I'm gonna do that again, just the tip of the brush. And it's very subtle. I'm trying to go for the smallest change possible with each step, okay? A little bit more water here. And you can see that it's getting slightly lighter with each step. And more water. So in watercolor, the way to lighten your colors is to add more water to the paint. Okay. That one might not even really be lighter, but that's okay. We're just practicing here, okay? Another thing to note is as watercolor dries, it tends to get a little bit lighter too. So you'll notice that they shift a little bit as they dry. So this one should be a little bit lighter than this one, especially once it dries. Okay. And we're just continuing to add more. I'm dabbing off my brush so that I don't have too much water on my brush. I don't want to have a puddle. So as I'm adding more water, I'm dabbing off the brush. Okay. And then we're working our way lighter and lighter. And so that time I didn't even go back into the paint. I just added water. Okay. And I'm not swishing in the water. I'm just dabbing to pick up some more water. And then dabbing off on the towel. Okay, I'm getting smaller because I'm running out of space. But this goes to show you that like you can get a huge range. I'm going to go below. A huge range of values with just one color, okay? And I could keep going because this is still showing, okay? Still showing. Okay, Okay, so this is a value range. That's about the lightest probably. You probably can't even see that on camera. I can see it though. Okay, so you can see we go from super dark and saturated, and we get lighter and lighter and lighter by adding more water to it. So if I take a very light wash and put it next to this dark wash, you're gonna see how that creates that contrast without having to have two different colors. We can have a very light wash next to a very dark wash. Okay, so you want to really use the contrast to your advantage, especially when you're using monochromatic color harmony schemes. Now, you want to use contrast like that no matter what scheme you use, so that's another reason that this is a very good idea to practice value studies and really learn how to effectively use contrast. Because if your whole painting is in this range, it will probably feel fairly boring. Now, there are effective paintings that are all mid-range, but they're made to be very calming. They evoke a certain mood of just kind of that peaceful, very, very calming. It doesn't give you any drama. So typically you want to have a wider range of values, okay? So you can do that with any color, but just know that like if you choose a color that is in general lighter, like this yellow, so this is lemon yellow deep, okay? So this is the lemon yellow in mass tone. I'm gonna go down here and work backwards, okay? Now, it's very opaque and it is very dark, okay? But it's gonna be it's not gonna feel like as dramatic of a change for each step. My neighbors are getting their trees trimmed, so I hope that you can't hear that chainsaw, but you probably can. Okay, so I'm just adding that water to each step, and you can see, like I'm trying to add about the same amount of water each time as I did to the purple, but it's just such a lighter value color that it's harder to get as much variety. Okay. I'm still seeing it again. Maybe on camera you can't. It's very, very light. But I can still see it. Okay. So, you know, we can still get a good range from dark to light, but we have to probably be a little bit more intentional if we're using these lighter value colors. And you might do some layering. So on the dark value here, if I layer over it, I should be able to make it a little bit darker. Okay, so it's just something to keep in mind that you can use layering to build the value as well. I did not do this on purpose, but this actually leads us right into our next color scheme. So the next color scheme is the complementary color scheme. So complementary color schemes use, if we go back to our previous videos, complementary colors. So we go back to our color wheels, and complementary colors are colors that sit opposite each other on the color wheel. So red and green are complementary colors. Yellow and purple are complementary colors, and orange and blue are complementary colors. But we can take that a step farther and go into our secondary colors and tertiary colors as well. So if we look at, you know, green and pink on this color wheel, let's go a step to the side. We have a purpley pink and we have a more lime green. Those would be complementary. Okay, if we have a more purpley blue, but it's still kind of blue, we want to choose a more yellowy orange versus a straight orange. Okay, so you can use those opposites on the color wheel to create those complementary color schemes. Okay, so on our example here, which I did not do on purpose again, this is complementary. We have purple and yellow. Okay, so those would be direct opposites on the color wheel. So this type of color scheme really adds a lot of drama and contrast to your work. This is probably the highest contrast you can get because they're directly opposite. And when you put those colors next to each other, they create a environment where each of the colors actually feels more vibrant and bold because it's sitting next to its direct opposite. The other nice thing about a complementary color scheme is, if you remember, if you watched the last video, if not, you should watch the last video. But if you remember, we talked about how to make colors move toward neutral to decrease the intensity of the colors. You add the contrasting color. So if we mixed the purple and the yellow together, we would get neutral colors. So in the complementary color scheme, you can take just those two colors and then mix them to create really interesting neutrals, where they're going to be pretty clean neutrals because you're just mixing two colors. You're not adding a whole bunch of different colors. And that's going to pull down some of the vibrancy from your work. So you're going to have some areas where you're going to have super intense colors next to each other, where those parts are going to pop out because they're going to be so vibrant, and they're actually going to look even more vibrant than the colors on their own. And then you're going to blend those colors in some areas to pull down the vibrancy, take the focus off of those areas, and give the eye kind of a path and a way to rest in the painting. So a couple of examples from master painters who really effectively used complementary color harmony schemes is first Monet in Impression Sunrise. So in Impression Sunrise, Monet used a very bright orange. It's a little bit of a reddy orange. And he contrasted that with a slightly greenish blue color. And you can see in the painting that he really got that super vibrant pop of color from the orange. And right around that is probably the highest intensity level of blue-green that he has in the painting. So that contrast of the most intense blue and the most intense orange is right at that focal point. And then everywhere else throughout the painting, you can see that those colors are dulled down a little bit. And he really put both of the colors throughout the entire painting and drew those colors together to really create an excellent harmony. And, he was just a master with Impressionism and using those colors to softly blend and putting them next to each other in the right amounts to really create like an optical blending where it blends with the eye, where he's not actually blending them, but it looks like it's blended. Very masterful painter. Another example of this is Van Gogh in his painting Café, Terrace at Night. So in the Café, Terrace at Night, you'll see that he uses a kind of purpley blue color mixed or contrasted with a orangey warm yellow. So again, it's not straight blue and orange. It's shifted a little bit. It's also not yellow and purple. So it's kind of that in between with the purpley blue and the yellowy orange. And putting those next to each other, again, creates that vibrancy and that bold choice, where that even this night scene where it's dark and kind of moody with the night scene, he really created a sense of drama by adding in that bright light of the terrace area and getting that orangey yellow glow of lights at night. So again, it's a different choice on the colors, but it's very effective in terms of contrasting color schemes. So if we look at our scheme here, right? So we had our monochromatic, our value studies. So now let's look at if we put those colors next to each other, okay? So I'm gonna add some more purple here, and we're going to take a purple, I'm going to put it up here in the corner. Actually, I'm going to put it in the middle. Okay, so there's our very vivid purple. Okay, now I'm going to put our very bright, vivid yellow next to it. Okay. And you can see how that feels in contrast to each other. Okay, they feel very bold. Now, if we mix some of those colors, okay, so I'm going to take my yellow and put it here, and then I'm going to take some purple and we're going to mix it. Okay, so I'm blending it here on the page. You can see we get this brown color. Okay. And so that would be our neutrals to pair with our vivid colors here. And then we can put, we can shift it a little bit more purple with our neutrals. So you can see how much less vibrant that purple is than that purple. And then we can shift it a little bit more yellow with our neutrals. Okay, so it's kind of I almost call this a muddy yellow, right? It's kind of an earthy yellow down here. It's not that vibrant, pure yellow. Okay, you can see how that would work next to this yellow to pull down some of that contrast. So when you're using a complementary color scheme, you're going to want to choose where you want these pure, vibrant colors and where you want the more muted colors. But you also want to use them both throughout the whole painting. And then you also would want to incorporate your different values. So you wouldn't want it all to be super saturated. You'd want some areas to have a light touch on the yellow and a light touch on the purple to create contrast in value as well as contrast in color. So it's not only about contrasting color, it's about contrasting value as well. So we could make our neutral a lot darker in value as well. Okay. And so I'm just adding color, taking off a lot of that water to make it a darker value. Okay, so there's our darker neutral versus our kind of mid-value neutral. And then we could take it further into a light value neutral. So that's going to usually be easier to mix on the palette, but I'm going to try to mix it on the page because I don't feel like mixing it on the palette. Okay, so here's a light value neutral. Okay, so you can have contrasting values and contrasting colors. So that is how you would kind of mix to create the differences in colors when you're using a contrasting color scheme. So next we have a split complementary color scheme. So this is similar to complementary, but it's going to have slightly lower contrast because you're not using the direct complementary color. So if we look at our color wheel, we have, so let's look at red and green. Okay, so the complementary colors would be red and green. Split complementary would be doing red with a yellowy green and a bluey green, and not choosing the full kind of contrasting middle green. So you would choose the colors on either side of it. And you can do that with any color. So if we used a deep red, we could use green and yellow. Okay, blue, we can use orange that's a more yellowy orange, and orange that's a more ruddy orange. Okay, so you can just choose any color on the color wheel and then select the colors that are adjacent to the complementary color. And that's how you're going to select a split complementary color scheme. So a famous painting that uses this color scheme is, I think it's pronounced Munch, but it might be Munch. I would say Munch as an English speaker, but Edvard Munch, the Scream, uses the split complementary color palette very effectively. So he chose blue as the primary color, And then instead of contrasting it with orange, he used a yellowy orange and a more reddish orange color. And so he put those in the sky next to each other. And so they're not a pure orange. You'll see it's more red and more yellow, but they're still in the orange family. And then he throws in some of the blue to really put that drama and contrast in, but it's not quite as dramatic of a contrast as a pure orange and a pure blue would be. And you can see that he really balances out the colors. So the bottom part of the painting is a lot more of the blues and then even more of the neutrals where those colors are mixed, just like in our complementary color scheme where you mix the colors. It's going to create very interesting neutrals that are going to push a little bit more toward that blue because they're a little bit cooler on your complementary colors. So they're not going to be quite as pure neutral browns and grays, but he uses those very effectively to give weight to the bottom of the painting. And then you have the most brightness up at the sky to kind of lift that area of the painting up. And, you know, here we're just looking at the color scheme. We're not looking at the rest, how he uses the brush strokes and, you know, perspective and all these things to create more drama. But just the color scheme itself creates a lot of drama without being super, super high contrast. So if we look back at our yellow and purple scheme here, we have to choose one that we want to be our primary. So if we choose purple as our primary, okay, we're going to put some purple here. Then our split complementary would be not yellow, but a more orangey yellow. So I can take my lemon yellow and add a touch of pink to it, not much, to make it a little bit more orange. Okay, there's our orangey yellow. And then we would want a little bit more of a green yellow. So I'm going to take just a touch of cobalt to add to that. Okay. And so we have that green yellow and an orangey yellow. So you can see it's still very high contrast, but it's not as high of a contrast as this. And so this purple almost looks a little bit cooler next to this yellow green than it does next to the bright yellow. So this almost looks a little bit warmer. So that's interesting, right? How you can kind of push those colors around and make them look different just based on what they're next to. Okay. So it almost looks like this purple goes from a cooler purple to a warmer purple, depending on what it's next to, but it's the same purple. Very interesting. Anyway, so you can do all the same things with mixing and your values and all of that. So if we have some of our purple here, I'm going to do a larger swatch because we're going to mix it with both colors here. So if I mix that with, oops, well, it's upside down now. That's the warmer color. So that would go with that, sorry. And then here's the cooler color. Okay, so you can see we create slightly different neutrals than we had here. So it's something to play with and to, again, learn your colors and learn that color mixing so that you know which colors are more directly complementary and which is going to give you a more true like brown neutral versus this is, you know, maybe a little bit more greenish, honestly. Then it's still brown though. It's just got a slightly different quality to it. Okay, so that's a split complementary palette. So the next one is an analogous color scheme. So Analogous color schemes are lower contrast by nature. So when we talk about an analogous color scheme, we're using 2 to 4 colors that all sit adjacent to each other on the color wheel. So they're not across the color wheel. So if you look at it, an analogous color scheme might be from blue to lime green, okay? Or you might go from kind of a purpley color toward a bluish green color, okay? On the opposite side, you can go from yellow to red, okay? Or like a reddish orange. And those are going to be your analogous color schemes, okay? So 2 to 4 colors. And these are really used to create very like natural, peaceful, calming paintings. So if you look at nature, you know, foliage and forests a lot of times have that analogous color scheme. You look at all of the different greens and yellows that occur in spring. If you look in fall, you have the warmer analogous color schemes with your oranges and your yellows and your reds, and then your neutrals to balance it out as well. You can always add neutrals in, but that's an analogous color scheme. So analogous color schemes are great in watercolor, especially if you're going to do like a single layer painting where you do lots of wet on wet, where you're not letting the layers dry in between. So let's look at, let's just put in the middle here, an analogous color scheme. So I'll choose, what do I want to choose? Well, I'll do an example of each, okay? So we're gonna take some blue first. Okay, so here is a cobalt blue. Okay. And then we can take some purple to go next to it. And I'm just going to let these touch a little bit because they play well together. They don't create neutrals. They're going to blend and mix to create something in between blue and purple, right? And then we can go the other direction and do just a little bit more of a greenish blue. So we don't want to choose something that's super green because that would take us kind of out of the analogous colors. But we can choose a greenish blue. I can add a little bit more green to that. Okay, this is aqua green. Okay. And so that pulls us toward that green. Okay. Now, even if I mix, let's say I mix the aqua green, take a little bit more of that, and the purple, they're still going to play well together and create a really pretty color, right? They're not going to create a neutral that might look muddy, okay? So I like this neutral. I don't consider that muddy. I consider that purposeful, clean. Muddy is, when I hear muddy, I think it's overused, but muddy to me means overworked, and where you're seeing like where you kind of overworked and the page might be getting some damage and it just looks kind of tortured. I use the word tortured more than muddy. So to me, this is a nice clean neutral, but some people would call that muddy. I don't. I think that was a very purposeful neutral that we created, but you're never going to get a color like that when you're using an analogous color palette. So this is a very effective way to create like abstract backgrounds in watercolor. If you want to just do wet on wet and let stuff explode and let it all blend together, then doing analogous colors is the way to go. Because I just dropped the purple in and it looks beautiful. It's gonna blend nicely. Okay, so we can go the opposite way too. So let's go ahead and use like an orange color. This is, I think, cadmium scarlet. I don't really know. Okay, so here is a crazy bright orange. Okay, it's kind of a reddish orange, but it's very bright. Okay. Now, analogous to that would be a yellow, right? Because this is an orange. So yellow would be next to it. We want to use a warm yellow, not a cool yellow. And I'm letting them touch and blend. Okay. Add a little bit more paint to the top. Okay. Now I could go for, this is a reddish orange, so I wouldn't probably want to go to a greenish yellow, because then the green and the red would not complement each other. If this was a more yellowy orange, then a greenish yellow would be fine. But since it's reddish, I need to go the other direction. So I'm going to go to an actual red, or even pink. So I can use pink here. I'm going to kind of go on the top. And pink is a nice analogous color with those, okay? Or I can use actually a red. So we have this one, which is a maroon color, okay? And you can see that that creates a different kind of atmosphere than the pink. But both work, because if I put this red over here with the yellow, it's gonna work. It doesn't create a neutral. It creates kind of an orangish color, right? Or if I mix the pink, oops, I just put a ton of water there. That's okay. You're gonna see it all plays well together. But if I mix yellow with pink, again, it's gonna create that bright orange. So this is another version of an analogous palette. Okay, so that is how you can create, especially if you're going for more flowy, washy look. You probably want to choose analogous colors until you really master water control, because you can put contrasting colors next to each other, wet, and it can work. Okay, I'm just putting some water here, and I'm going to choose blue and orange. So I can put some blue in, okay? And then I can put some orange in, and it can work, okay? I can even touch them right on top of each other. But you really have to understand your water control and making sure that you're not blending too much, because let's say, for example, that's a sky, right? This sky is a lot easier to create than this sky. This sky, you're going to create browns if you do it incorrectly. So if you're doing the washiness and you haven't really mastered water control, you're probably going to want to stick with your analogous color schemes. So Renoir chose a lot of these natural analogous color schemes in his paintings. Again, I'm not going to try to pronounce the name of this painting, but he really used the analogous color scheme with the interplay of some soft greens, some soft bluish greens, and then the yellowish greens to really create this peaceful scene. And there's a lot going on in the scene, but it still doesn't feel like super high contrast or chaotic because it's got this analogous color scheme. Now, one kind of thing that you'll see a lot used is you'll see an analogous color scheme with just one tiny little pop of color. And my brain goes to Monet when I think about these type of schemes. His lily pad paintings all use an analogous color scheme with the greens and the blues and like on that cooler side, but then he always puts the little pop of pink in there. And that pink is that contrasting color to the greens. And so it's almost like a split complementary, but it's not, because it has the direct complementary in there. So it's really an analogous palette with a tiny pop of the complementary to create a little bit more interest, but it's still very much analogous with very little of the contrasting color. So you can think about that too, where you pick one opposite color and just very sparingly use that in your analogous paintings if you want to. So then we get into kind of the more complex color schemes for creating color harmony. So we have triadic and tetradic color schemes, and these get a lot more challenging to balance the colors. When you only have 2 colors or even 3 where they're kind of directly contrasting with the split contrast, it's a lot easier to balance how much of each you should use and where you should put them. But the triadic color scheme, it's 3, but they're 3 equally spaced along the color wheel. And then the tetradic would be 4 equally spaced along the color wheel. So I'm gonna show you what that looks like on our color wheels here. So 3 is kind of intuitive because you think about our primary colors, right? So red, blue, yellow would be a triadic color scheme. They're equally spaced, blue, yellow, red. Okay, they have 3 steps in between. Okay, you can shift that over some, and you could do a kind of purpley blue, you could do an orangey red, and you could do a yellowy green. Okay, so you can shift that. You could do the secondary colors with purple, green, and orange. Okay, those are all tetradic color schemes. And you can use either color wheel for this. You're going to get more vibrancy if you're using the CYM. You're going to get more earthy tones if you're using the RBY. Okay, but it's the same idea. Then we look at tetradic. Okay, so tetradic is a whole lot harder, but it's going to be 4 equally spaced. So if we look at, I'm going to use these. Okay, so we can look at 4 equally spaced. They're going to be 2 apart each. Okay, so we have a lime green, we have a primary blue, we have a deep red, and we have a primary orange. Okay, that's a tetradic. Okay, we can turn it and do yellow, purple, and then a reddish orange and a greenish blue. Okay, and then we can just keep turning our wheels to get all of the colors. Okay, so you could have the green and red and a bluish purple and a yellowish orange. Okay, so that's a lot more complex to balance. So if we look at the triadic scheme, we can see an example of that with another Monet painting. And I don't know how to pronounce this one, but it really uses those primary colors. You can see how he used those transitions, and he really effectively created focal points using the 3 colors. And he lets them blend some. A lot of that is optical blending on the page with how his brushstrokes are laid next to each other. But you're not seeing that he's blending really the red and the yellow to make it orange, or he's not really blending the blues and the yellows to make green, or reds and blues to make purples, but it's there, it's all built up, and you can see how it's creating almost that rainbow effect, but it's really using that triadic color scheme effectively. But again, it's pretty complex to use it effectively, but the triadic is easier than the tetradic. So it's a matter of planning and balancing and understanding what mood and look you're going for. So an example of a tetradic color scheme that I found was Matisse's Desert Harmony in Red. So Matisse uses a tetradic color scheme here, and it works very effectively with this kind of flat, stylistic approach. You can see that he's not really trying to build up a lot of depth in the scene. It's purposefully flattened, and everything is honestly very similar value as well. Everything is very bold, very like full coverage, very mass tone. We don't have a lot of light values. You do have some pops of white in there to create those highlights and those points of interest, but he's using these colors very boldly in this painting, and it is very effective. And that just goes to show like how masterful Matisse is in his use of color. So in this painting, I'm gonna show you on the color wheel. So he uses a red, okay, and then the contrasting color of green, and then his opposite colors, or the finishing out the tetradic. So we have the complementary of red and green, and then he uses a very deep, dark purpley blue and an orangey yellow. He does have some hints of a more pure yellow, but it's still leaning warmer. It's still a slightly warmer yellow. It's not a greenish yellow. So he uses those 4 colors, and the dominant color really is red in this painting, but he uses the colors, all of them, a lot. It's not like one of them is just a slight tiny peak. He did throw some pink in there too, just in the corner. So that's kind of the lighter version of the red. And it's definitely a warmer pink. It's not a cool pink. So it's, again, using that same red. So it's just a very hard thing to do to create a good color harmony with using that many bold, bright colors. So the biggest thing to remember with these different color schemes for creating color harmony is that these are just kind of guides. They're not strict rules. Again, color, I've said this in the other videos, color is complex. Color theory is just that. It's a theory. It's a way for artists to all talk about a very complex subject in a universal and uniform way so that we can all actually have a conversation. Because if we don't have terms and if we don't agree on the theories, then it's just chaos. So even though color is a super complex thing, again, like I said in previous videos, it's a spectrum. It's not like integer numbers, 1, 2, 3, 4. It's like irrational numbers. It's all the numbers, and it's a continuous spectrum. But we have to be able to break it down a little bit. So these color schemes do that for us, but they're a guide. They're not a rule. So you can always tweak them. You can play with them as much as you want and use them as kind of a jumping off point for your color adventures. And then another thing to remember is that color harmony does not mean that the painting has to be boring or low contrast or anything like that. It's really creating a conversation for your colors, letting them all shine and have their point to talk, and creating intentional contrast and intentional drama versus it just being chaos. So just to kind of close out, I have a couple tips for creating color harmony, and you can use these within the color schemes that we discussed or in whatever color scheme you choose. But some kind of easy little pro tips to help create balance in your colors. The first one is to make sure that you're repeating key colors throughout the painting. So if you have, you choose your superhero color, your hero color, to be blue, you don't want that blue probably to just be in one spot of the painting. You want it to peek out in different areas. Another tip is to allow one color family to dominate the painting. So if you use a contrasting color scheme and you have greens and reds, you might want to choose greens or, whichever one, but let's say you choose greens to kind of dominate and the reds are to create your focal points to pop out. So you could put, a cardinal in a tree and put some red flowers in one area and maybe some berries, right? And let that be throughout the painting, but use it in smaller amounts. Now you can create effective paintings having them be equal and balanced. It's just harder. Another kind of similar idea to the repeating colors is to really echo some of the colors in the shadows. So using those dulled down versions of your colors to create the shadows instead of pulling in a different color to create the shadow is typically going to be a lot more effective. And then with that, you really want to balance your more saturated areas with your more vibrant areas. So darker values and more intensity with your lighter values and less intensity or more muted colors. So figuring out a balance between those, you can use one as focal points or you can balance it equally across the scheme, but you want to think about the balance between not just the colors, but your intensity and your values as well. And then typically it's best to limit your choices to only a few hues. So if you're using a whole bunch of different colors, a whole bunch of different hues in your painting, it's going to be a lot harder to balance out the color harmony, even if those color hues are all in the same family. So if I use, 4 different yellows that are all in my palette, it's going to be harder to create balance than if I choose 1 or 2 of them. So that brings us to what our next video is going to be, which is going to be using a limited palette. So this will really show us how using just 2 or 3 or maybe 4 colors can create a much stronger painting and composition, not a weaker one, even though you're using fewer colors. So if you enjoyed this video on color harmony, let me know in the comments, give it a like, tell me what your favorite color harmony is to use when you're painting, or if you hadn't heard of some of these, let me know, and we can have a conversation down in the comments. Thank you so much for watching, and until next time, keep your paints flowing.